Right now, as you're watching this, a preliminary statistical analysis from a climate scientist at Indiana University is circulating through the scientific community with a single number attached to it that has not yet been peer-reviewed, has not yet been confirmed by any government health agency, and is already being taken seriously enough to reshape how meteorologists are talking about this entire summer. That number is 20,390 deaths, and it covers just one single week, the 22nd to the 28th of June, the week Europe's heat wave reached its absolute peak. Separately, using actual hard mortality records rather than a statistical model, the European Mortality Monitoring Network, known as EuroMOMO, has already confirmed more than 10,000 excess deaths across the continent during roughly the same stretch, a real measured number closing in on the preliminary estimate from an entirely different direction. Both of these numbers cover only the worst single week of a heat wave season that started in May, and, as of today, the 27th of July, still has not fully ended. This is the story of what scientists are actually saying about how many people Europe's record heat wave may have killed this summer, where that 20,000 figure actually comes from, and why the true number, once the season is finally over, could end up considerably higher than even that. No hype, no exaggeration, just what the data says and how it was calculated. Drop a comment and tell me if you or anyone you know felt the effects of this heat wave directly, because behind every one of these numbers is somebody's actual grandmother, neighbor, or coworker. If you want grounded science coverage instead of vague headlines, subscribe. It is free, and a like helps this reach people who need to understand what is actually happening to their own continent. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Thank you. Now let us get into it. To understand where a number like 20,000 deaths actually comes from, you first need to understand that heat deaths are almost never counted, the way deaths from a car crash or fire are counted. Extreme heat rarely appears as the official cause of death on a death certificate. Instead, it kills indirectly, by pushing an already strained heart into cardiac arrest, by triggering a fatal stroke, by causing kidney failure in someone dehydrated and elderly, or by simply overwhelming a body that could not cool itself down fast enough. Because of that, scientists studying heat mortality do not wait for hospitals to tally a body count. They build what are called temperature mortality response functions, statistical models constructed from years of historical data that establish exactly how much the death rate in a given region rises for every additional degree of heat. And then they apply that established relationship to the actual temperatures recorded during a specific event to calculate excess mortality, meaning how many more people died than would have died in an ordinary week with ordinary weather. That is exactly the method Christopher Callahan, an assistant professor at Indiana University Bloomington, used in the analysis now circulating, posted openly on the preprint server Zenodo, rather than through a traditional journal, specifically so the findings could reach the public and other scientists faster than the months-long peer review process normally allows. Callahan himself has been careful to describe his own numbers as preliminary, built on a previously developed and tested statistical approach, rather than a new count of confirmed bodies, and has said the true, fully verified toll will likely take governments several more months to calculate and publish officially. The country-by-country breakdown inside that preliminary estimate is worth sitting with, because it shows just how unevenly this heat wave's worst week actually struck. France, which absorbed the most extreme temperatures of any major country during that stretch, is estimated to have suffered 5,210 deaths in that single week alone. Germany follows closely behind at 4,543. Spain, despite decades of experience managing extreme heat, still recorded an estimated 3,163 deaths. Italy comes in at 2,709, and the United Kingdom, a country whose housing stock was never built with serious heat in mind, still shows an estimated 862 deaths for that same single week. Layered on top of these national estimates is a separate finding from ClimateNova, an observation-based rapid climate attribution framework that analyzes extreme weather events as they happen rather than months afterward, which calculated that 327 million people and roughly $15.6 trillion in physical assets were exposed to heat intensified specifically by climate change during this event, with 81% of those people and 86% of those assets falling inside the very highest heat exposure category the framework tracks. The mechanism behind why this particular heat wave reached the intensity it did is, by now, well understood by the meteorologists who watched it build in real time. A blocking pattern in the jet stream, specifically a formation known as an omega block for the shape it traces across a weather map, settled directly over Western Europe in late June and simply refused to move, trapping hot, dry air pulled up from North Africa underneath a ridge of high pressure that pushed temperatures as much as 18 degrees Celsius above their normal seasonal average in some regions. That kind of stationary self-reinforcing pattern is precisely what turns an uncomfortable hot spell into a mass casualty event, because it does not just raise the temperature for a day or two, it holds an entire population under dangerous heat for long enough that the body's ability to recover overnight starts to break down, especially for anyone already vulnerable. That vulnerability is not spread evenly across the population either. Prior research into European heat mortality has consistently found that women die from extreme heat at rates well above men, and that people over the age of 80 face a risk of dying from heat that can run more than 7 times higher than people in their 60s and 70s, a pattern Euromomo's own confirmed data for this exact event reflects directly, with more than 9,000 of the roughly 10,000 confirmed excess deaths so far occurring among people aged 65 and older, a group that already represents a shrinking share of the overall population, but an outsized share of every heat wave's actual toll. It is also worth being precise about how much of this heat wave's severity scientists can actually attribute to a warming planet, rather than treating that link as a vague assumption. The World Weather Attribution Group, a team of scientists who specialize in calculating how much more likely climate change makes any specific extreme weather event, concluded that a heat wave this severe, arriving this early and hitting this hard, would have been what they described as virtually impossible without the influence of human-caused warming. That is not a loose rhetorical statement. It is the output of a specific comparative modeling process that runs the same weather pattern through simulations of both today's warmer climate and a version of the climate without a century of accumulated greenhouse gas emissions, then compares how often an event of this magnitude would occur in each. When that comparison shows an event moving from essentially impossible to something that can now actually happen, it means the extra heat sitting on top of an already dangerous weather pattern is not incidental background noise. It is a measurable, quantified addition to the death toll itself. There's a genuinely important comparison sitting inside this event that has shown up in essentially every major European heatwave study of the past 2 decades, and it is worth pulling out on its own because it says something about what actually reduces the death toll once the heat itself is unavoidable. Only about 1 in 5 homes across Europe has any form of air conditioning, and much of the continent's housing stock, particularly in Germany, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands, was deliberately built to retain heat through cold, damp winters, rather than release it during hot summers, a design choice that made perfect sense for the climate those buildings were built in decades ago and now works directly against the people living inside them. France, despite recording the highest single-week death estimate of any country in this event, has spent more than 2 decades building a formal heat response system in direct reaction to a catastrophic heat wave in 2003 that killed roughly 70,000 people across Europe, including welfare checks, targeting elderly residents living alone, coordinated cooling centers, and public alert systems, triggered automatically once temperatures cross specific thresholds. France's interior minister pushed back directly against domestic criticism of the government's response during this event, insisting the country was genuinely prepared rather than caught off guard, and pointing to more than 130 million euros already allocated toward cooling systems and renovation work in French schools and nurseries. Whether that preparation meaningfully held France's own death toll below what it might otherwise have been is exactly the kind of question researchers will spend the coming months trying to answer with harder data. But the historical pattern from previous heat waves strongly suggests infrastructure and institutional memory matter as much as the raw temperature itself, since a country facing the same peak temperature as a less prepared neighbor does not automatically face the same death toll. Placing this event inside the broader history of European heat mortality is where the real weight of these numbers becomes clear. The catastrophic 2003 heat wave killed more than 70,000 people across the continent and fundamentally changed how European governments think about heat as a public health threat. The summer of 2022, once fully studied using more detailed daily mortality data rather than early weekly estimates, was eventually revised upward to just over 70,000 deaths as well, a figure initially underestimated by more than 10% using older statistical methods. 2023, the year after that, still produced an estimated 47,690 deaths across the same stretch of months. What makes this year's numbers so alarming to the scientists studying them is not that 20,000 deaths in a single week is automatically higher than any of those full season totals. It is not, but that this year's 20,000 figure covers only 7 days out of a heat season that began in May with a separate historic heat wave, continued through this catastrophic June event, and, as of today, is still not officially over, with France's own National Weather Service having already warned before this event even ended that it was anticipating a further heat episode later in the summer. So what does all of this actually mean for you, wherever you happen to be watching this from? If you live anywhere in Europe, the practical takeaway from this entire body of research is that the danger from a heat wave does not end when the temperature finally drops, because the excess deaths tied to an event like this one continue, accumulating for weeks after the peak heat has already passed, particularly among elderly relatives and neighbors living alone. Checking in directly on anyone in that position during and immediately after a heat warning, rather than assuming the danger is past once the forecast improves, is a genuinely actionable habit sitting directly inside this exact data. If you live somewhere outside Europe watching this unfold from a distance, the lesson is less about this specific continent and more about the method itself. Since the same kind of statistical modeling, now estimating 20,000 deaths in Europe, is increasingly being applied to heat events everywhere. And the pattern it keeps finding, that official confirmed heat deaths represent only a small fraction of the true toll, is not unique to any single country. The honest, grounded summary is this. A preliminary, not yet peer-reviewed statistical analysis estimates that Europe's catastrophic heat wave killed more than 20,000 people in a single week in late June alone, a figure independently supported by confirmed mortality data from Euromomo, showing more than 10,000 excess deaths across roughly the same window, using actual death records rather than a model. France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and the United Kingdom all absorbed thousands of estimated deaths apiece in that single stretch, with the overwhelming majority falling among people over the age of 65. That single week sits inside a heat season that began in May and, as of today, has not yet ended, meaning the full summer total, once every episode is finally tallied months from now, could rival or exceed the death tolls from Europe's worst heat waves on record. We are going to keep tracking this as the official, fully verified numbers are published in the coming months, sourced the same way we did today, straight from the researchers actually building these models, and the mortality monitoring agencies actually confirming them with hard data, not recycled headlines. Subscribe so you do not miss the official confirmation when it lands, because based on everything the preliminary data already shows, it is unlikely to bring good news. And leave that comment below. Tell me whether your own country has a real heat response plan in place, and whether you know if the elderly people in your own life are being checked on during one of these numbers is a specific person, someone's mother in Paris who never made it to a cooling center, someone's grandfather in a flat in Berlin with no air conditioning and no idea how dangerous the week ahead of him actually was, and a scientist in Indiana who published his own preliminary numbers before they were finished simply because he believed people deserved to know the scale of this before governments finish their own official count months from now. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.